So this is a bit of a full circle moment. I don't know if you remember this, Rod, but when I was this was probably about 11 years ago. I think I was a junior in high school in speech class. We had to interview somebody and you were the person I chose. Do you remember that
You
interview?
know, I think I do.
Do you?
Yeah, I think I do because this year I've had several. We have Catholic School News on KDIX, and I've had several individuals call me to interview, and I had a couple young men and women do that, and I got thinking, this isn't the first time I've done that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I do remember. I don't remember a lot of things about 10 years back, but I do remember doing interviews. Yeah,
It was for Mrs. Schiff's speech class, and
yeah.
so I guess I would say that it hasn't been too long since you've been interviewed or been in the interviewee chair.
Hasn't been too bad.
No.
You get in it every once in a while. You
Yeah.
get to get somebody else. Somebody else does interview you. But I enjoy this end of it. It's kind of nice, kind of
Yeah,
different.
be able to tell different stories because
Yeah.
you've forgotten more sports than most of us will ever know or remember. And so this is Conversation Monday. It is the legend, the Rocket Rod Kleinjan. He's been calling games in Dickinson for
49 years.
49 years, and he got his start in Lemmon.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
this
right.
is May of 1972. I went from graduation to our graduation party to Lemmon, South Dakota, KBJM, all in a span of 24 hours, and started working at KBJM immediately from graduation. And that was 51 years ago. So I was there for just about 2 years at Dickinson State for a year when they had the old radio broadcasting course there. And then I worked part-time at KDIX and went full-time in May of 1974 at KDIX. So 49 years, just
Wow.
about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Do you remember the first game you called for KDIX?
Oh, I really don't, but I do know one thing I better do, and I better do that right now. There we go. Let me turn that off. We'll set that up. I really don't. I was thinking about that on the way over here. I was trying to remember. I remember the first game I did in Lemmon because it was a Legion baseball game because Larry Bauer, who owned the station, was a lead instructor at Brown Institute, and he had retired from there and bought the station in Lemmon and one in Millbank. And he said, Rod, you're going to go do a ball game. Well, I said, I've never done a ball game. And he said, just go do it. So I went and he set the gear up, said, you're on the air, go. And he left, and I had to do the game. So I did it. At KDIX, I'm thinking it probably was a game, I want to say had to be a high school game because right away when I got there, I didn't do college games because Bob Weiler was still doing some college games. So it had to be either a Dickinson High or a Dickinson Trinity football game because I think we didn't at that time do baseball, so we weren't doing baseball in the summer. So either had to be a Titan football game or a midget football game, but I don't know. I can't remember which one it was.
Okay. Do you remember how you were feeling going into that first game? Were you nervous, excited, or because was it the first game you've ever done, or have you worked? Did you work at a radio station in high school at all, where you had some experience?
What happened in high school was I worked. I went to Mott High School, and this Larry Bauer. They did several Mott games because Lemmon and Mott always played. So what I did is I did a thing called Mott Public School News, and I'd call it in on the phone, and they'd record it, and then they'd sell, of course, go down, and even in those days, they'd go sell advertising in Mott to sponsor the program, and that's what I did. But the first baseball game, can we swear here or not?
Yeah.
I was scared as hell when he told me you're on the air and you got to do it. And, I don't know how many people were listening, but I know there were two, my mom and dad. So, yeah, I was really, really nervous to do it. I don't know, I had butterflies and that type of thing. But once I started doing it, I was comfortable with it because in high school, I used to sit in the stands before Mott played basketball, before we would play varsity basketball games. And I had a tape recorder and I'd tape the sophomore games into the tape recorder, do play-by-play and do that. So I kind of had a feel for it, but it's still different when when you think, of course, in 1972, you're thinking, oh, but there's probably thousands and thousands of people listening, and there probably was about 10 people listening, but you're still nervous about it. Yeah.
Yeah. One of those things, and then it starts going, and then you gotta get into the flow of it, and it's like it's a lot different before you can just talk all you want, and then it's like, oh, this is for real. We're
Yeah,
live. We're
yeah.
going. And
Yeah, it's kind of like being in a basketball game, and it doesn't matter if the 10 people in the gym are 1,000, and you're going to the free throw line to win the game. You're going to be nervous about it. And, I was really nervous. I do remember that first baseball game when I got to Dickinson. I had done enough games in Lemmon, so then it was kind of just becoming second nature. I was very comfortable with it.
did you have any role models or influences that you looked up to when you decided to go the radio route?
When I grew up, my dad was a big, in those days, my dad was a big radio listener, and he had radios in the house, and there was always games on the radio all the time, baseball games, football games. And I grew up listening, kind of my heroes when I started in high school listening to people were Russ Smith, who was at Minot. He's a Hall of Famer, and he was just an outstanding broadcaster. I listened to Raj Hagens a lot.
I've heard that name.
Yeah,
I can't
he
think
got
of where he's-
KFYR. He was a
Okay.
KFYR in Bismarck. He did radio and TV, just like I did at KDIX for many years. And those two guys were kind of the guys you always listen to. And then as I got a little bit older, then you'd listen to the national side. Vin Scully's always been a favorite. I guess that's kind of copping out, but everybody says Vin Scully if they're in broadcasting, but he was so good that you just like to listen to him, and you can maybe pick some things up and that type of thing from him. And I don't know. Bob Costas was another guy that once I got into it a little bit, I liked to listen to also, and I had opportunity to meet him back. I can't remember how many years ago, but when we had our national sportscasters and sports writers convention, and that year Scooter Persley was the sports writer of the year from the Bismarck Tribune, and I was the broadcaster. That was my first broad. And Bob Costas came over and sat with us, and he just was amazing. You guys from North Dakota? I know Roger Maris. He's from North Dakota. So he came over and he spent a lot of time with us. And I still got a picture in my office of him and I standing together with a picture. And after I met him and listened and got an opportunity to visit with him, I always listened to him. And I always thought he was another guy that I kind of looked up to. So, yeah, those guys. But locally, it would have been Russ Smith and Roger Hagens would have been the guys that I would have. And of course, my boss, Bob Weiler. You listen to him, Bob, all the time. And sometimes you forget about the guys that are right there. But Bob was another guy that did a lot of sports, and I had an opportunity to listen to him growing up also.
Yeah, and I have a Vin Scully story. So this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago when we took a family vacation out to LA, and we went to a Dodger game, and in between innings they would always play like his radio broadcast because it was just he didn't have a color man, it was just him for the most part, and you could the silence in the stadium just listening to him because everybody was just so tuned in to hearing him because he just had a way with words of the way he could narrate and tell stories.
I didn't realize they did that they play. That is really neat that they do something like that.
Because he did simulcast for both the radio and the TV. Yeah. But and then that was a cool. I was going to ask what Bob Costas was like, but you just kind of went into it as well. Have you gotten to meet any other famous?
I've met Bob Costas as one. You look at another guy that does a lot of sports, and Pat Summerall was a guy that I had met once, and he was at a national convention. And you meet a few other people also, but it's more on a regional basis, kind of state type basis. So it's fun to meet those guys and see. And it's no different than me and you sitting down. Once you sit down and visit with them, they're just they're like you and me. I mean, they're you put them way up here sometimes, and that's fine because they should be up there, but they're just great guys to visit with. But Pat Summerall, that I forgot about meeting Pat too. I met him down 1 year in Minneapolis at a convention down there.
Okay. And then so you said, what year did you go to KDIX?
I went to KDIX in May of 1974. But when I started at KDIX in May of 1974, I started really, when I started there, I started in television because they needed a TV news director.
Oh, they had a TV?
Oh, I
did not know they had TV.
Oh, we had a TV station. I did TV news for a year, and then I got into radio part-time when I was there because I did a little bit in college when I went to Dickinson State. But TV was there till, oh, man, I did TV. Let's see, I've been there 49 years. I probably did TV for 30 years there. They had a full-fledged TV station there. They had news, weather, sports, And you know Vicki Dean Steiner? Do you know Vic?
Yep.
She
Yep.
was a news director for many years there, and I worked with her. I was in sports then, and yeah, they had full television newscasts just like you watch now on KFR TV or KX. We had I was a sports guy. We had a weather person, and then we had a news director that did news and a couple of reporters. And I started doing that in 1974, and I think the last year I did some TV probably was in about 74, 25, probably about 1998, 1999 to 2000. And then it shifted a little bit. Then they sold the TV station to Wright Broadcasting and kind of made it just a satellite station. But yeah, that's what I did. I do a basketball game, get done, and run down to the station and do the TV sportscast. Yeah.
Oh wow! That is a fun fact Friday that people are going to find out on a Monday. I had no idea that KDIX used to be a TV
yeah.
station.
Yeah, there was Stan Deck owned the radio and the TV station, and Warren Verana was one of the people. Lauren Hockey was another one that did a lot of work in the TV. And then there was all kinds of people. We had a full radio staff and full TV staff working in the building down there. Yeah.
So you mentioned you were doing newscasts, you were doing the games, you were getting down to the station. What other type of duties did you have to do while it was a full-fledged TV station?
Yeah, it was just you were a sports director and news director, and your job was to, if you're a news director, you'd say, okay, what are we going to? You have the reporters, what are we going to do today? And you'd say, okay, you're going to cover city commission, you're going to cover county commission. Sports wise, we'd set up, somebody to go out, and it was really different there because at that time you didn't have a lot of video, which is kind of goofy, but you didn't because the cameras were so big and it was hard. It isn't like it is now. So a lot of times you would just have the sportscast would be you'd rip the wire for national sports and have a scoreboard for local sports, and then you'd have that. You wouldn't, you'd talk about the Trinity Dickinson High basketball game, but you wouldn't have any highlights to show. But you'd say, Lynn Gress scored 22 points, Rod Kleinjan had 25, Dickinson Trinity beat Dickinson High 52-54, and then you go to Belfield South Harbor play. It wasn't any video. It was just basically people were looking at you, or they had a scoreboard up behind you or in front of you, and that's what TV was for most of the years. Then it got later, and then we had more video. But when you started, it was pretty much a cold read. You just read, and that was it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So you mentioned Dickinson High Trinity basketball games. What were those games like?
Oh, they were fun. They were great. And
what was like atmosphere, the games, the competitiveness? Could you tell that there was always a little bit of an edge in the whether it be at Trinity or DHS?
When I first started, it was a little bit overwhelming because at that time Bob Weiler would do most of the Trinity games, and I would do the Dickinson High games. Well, when Trinity and Dickinson High played, Bob would do the game, so I wouldn't do the game. And I kind of I'd go to the game and sit with Bob, or I'd sit in the stands and watch the game. And in the early days, I mean, it was, like a really true hatred between the two. Nowadays, I don't think it would be that way. But then, I mean, they just did not like each other. When Trinity and Dickinson High played, I mean, it was like, we don't like, Dickinson High doesn't like Dickinson Trinity, and Dickinson Trinity didn't like Dickinson High. It was great. And the intensity was like off the charts. I mean, you sit and you think you have rivalries, like Trinity now and Beulah maybe, or Dickinson High and like a Bismarck High, and they're rivals. And I mean, they're intense. But I mean, when Dickinson, and they played twice a year, and they played in football once a year, so it was, and basketball was just unbelievable. I mean, it was, and it never really changed. I really miss that. And in fact, I wish now. I said my goal before I quit doing this, or before they throw my ashes someplace, is to see Dickinson High and Trinity play again. It's so hard now to get games, and I was hoping maybe with the the new 3-class system, Trinity was having a hard time getting games. Dickinson High I was thinking maybe once or twice they could play, in the upcoming years, and 1 year play at Trinity, 1 year play at Dickinson, and just play each other. I know it's double A against A or A against B, but it would be a great opportunity. And you don't have to drive all the way to Langdon to play a game, or you don't have to drive to South Dakota for like Rapid City or something to pick up games, because it's hard to get games. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I'd like to try to get a KDIX game where we'll sponsor the game, and Dickinson High will play Dickinson Trinity once in boys basketball, once in girls basketball. I would love to see that.
I would too. I think that would be a lot of fun, and it would sell tickets. It would be a packed house, and I like you said. I don't know if the hatred is still there because
No,
I mean
don't think it is.
they're still playing it, but I think it would be more so for parents, grandparents. I think that would kind of rekindle some of it. But if you had a specific, or do you have a specific memory of one of those games that sticks out to you?
You know, I always get asked that question, and there's so many games that it's just hard. I just remember, you know, there were so many good players. I mean, there was some great athletes when I started at KDIX that played for Dickinson High and played for Dickinson Trinity, and I mean and Doug Bedoin is one guy that comes to mind. He didn't end up staying here; he ended up going to Jamestown, but he played. I just remember playing against a couple of guys. That Emery Koenig was another guy that was really a good player, and there's just been so many good players, and the games were just like, I don't know, they were close games, competitive. When I said hatred, it wasn't really a hatred between the players playing, because they were playing and they were just playing hard and working hard, and I mean they might get upset, but you know, the older folks, you know, the fans and the grandpas and the grandmas and the moms and dads, sometimes that's where it was a little bit tougher, I think, to be a fan of Trinity or a fan of Dickinson High. And as the years went by and they kept playing, it got a little bit better. And then, of course, they quit playing and it's never come back. But and I'm just talking basketball. Football, I don't think I would like to see it happen. But basketball, you know, I would have liked to see Jake Schob go up against Alex DeBorak this year. That would have been
fun.
Two really good high school basketball players. And I mean, there's 4 other guys on the court, but it would have been fun to watch those two play against each other. And they would have, you know, it would have been competitive games. I don't know who would have won and by how much, but you know, it's just something that I wish it would happen, and I don't think it will. But I'm going to keep hoping for it, and maybe it will before I quit.
Yeah,
or before I die.
I'll clip this and I'll share this and take it to both and see if Grinsteiner and Guy can get something worked out between the two of them. But and then so you talked about do you have any memories from the DHS Trinity football games?
Well, you know, those games were very competitive too. I remember that Trinity, you know, one of the biggest memories I have from Trinity isn't against Dickinson High. It was against Fargo South in the state championship game when they won, and I think that was 1979. And at that time, Bob Weiler again was doing the Trinity game, so I was on the field, kind of doing like reports.
That game is on YouTube actually.
Yeah, and I had an opportunity to be on the field, do reports, and do interviews, and we put together a program, a 30-minute program at KDIX honoring Trinity and stuff. But I just remember it was a beautiful afternoon. You know, you never know what you're going to get in November in North Dakota.
Where was it played at?
It was played at Whitney Stadium.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did they determine state champion sites back then?
I have no idea how they did, but all I know is that game, I think it was the highest seeded team got to host it.
It's like what Montana does.
And Trinity had beaten Rugby in one game, and then they had beaten, I think, Fargo. I want to say Fargo North or somebody, or Valley City, and then they played Fargo South and come through the other side beaten. And it was just a tremendous. I mean, South was just loaded, and Dickinson Trinity was just loaded, and Trinity won the state championship in 1979, and that was Class A. And Whitney Stadium was packed, and they were on the hills, and it was just about a 50-degree day and no wind and sunny, and it was just a great experience to be around. And then it was a great football game, and that I remember most from Trinity. And from Dickinson High, I remember going to the Fargo Dome a couple of times, and they won a state championship the one time for sure. I'm trying to think of what year that was, but they had a great team. So
97?
Yeah, I think it was. And I just remember those games with those teams, but not against each other. I don't remember a lot about the football games against each other. I do remember a couple of years Trinity just dominated, and then a couple of years Dickinson High dominated. So the games that I remember weren't very close, and it was either Trinity winning big or Dickinson High winning big. They weren't very close most of the time.
Okay. Interesting.
But I'm sure there was some close ones. I just don't remember them.
Okay. Yeah. And so now do you how much has technology changed from when you started to what it is now?
Way too much for me. It's the technology got here. I'm not a tech guy. I just like to go in and you plug into a phone line and you put the headsets on and you do the game. It's changed immensely. I mean, you've got Ethernet now. You've got So, you got cell, you can do cell, you can do phone, you got all kinds of things. So technology is past this old guy from Mott by, but you learn to work with it and do the best you can. But it's amazing what you can do now with broadcasting. But in the old days, for basketball, we had what you called a Marty unit, and it was just a transmitter, radio transmitter, and it was about as big as about 2 feet wide and about 3 feet high, and it was a metal thing, and it had a big antenna. Well, you would go into the gym, you'd set it in the bleachers, hook it up, turn it up, hook your headsets up, and play the game. Well, we use that, and you take that in town everywhere we went. That we did it at Dickinson High, Dickinson Scott Gym, Dickinson Trinity, Dickinson High, at the Whitney Stadium, at the ballpark. You would use it, and then it went to getting phone lines in, which to me is still the best thing that you can use to do a game is just a regular old landline, and nobody even has. Do you have a landline in your house?
I don't. My parents still do, but yeah. I don't.
I do. I said I've got a house where I live, and my wife says we don't need that landline. I said for 50 years of my broadcasting career, I've depended upon a landline. We're keeping the landline. I don't care if we use the phone or not. If I want to come in and plug my phone in, we've got a landline. But yeah, and now, like I said, you have Ethernet and you have all internet, and you can do all this. So yeah, that's probably been just amazing what you can do now and where you can do it from and how you can do it. But it's still too technical for me.
Yeah, well, and I wouldn't consider myself super techie. I've gotten to plenty of screaming matches with this thing, whether it didn't want to connect with my computer or whatever happens. I know I recorded a podcast with Trace a while back, and my internet decided to just crap out. So it just lagged the whole time. So I don't have the interview with Trace is done. So we're going to have to redo that again. But you talked about this big bulky thing you had to carry up. How did you carry? Because DHS's, and people who are familiar with DHS's press box in the gym, it's just this big box, and you got to climb up a ladder to get in. How do you that? I wish somebody had video of you trying to bring that in.
Well, I was young then, so it wasn't hard. So you'd set it in the bleachers, you'd pick it up, you'd put it up there, climb up the ladder and do it. Now I have I had a couple of people this year telling me, you can't do that anymore, Rod. You're going to fall. You can't make it up. And I don't. Now all I got is a little kit that you set up there and you take it. But yeah, that back in those days, it was a lot of work to do that. And then of course, then you had to wait till you got done, and most of the people got out of there to wait for them to get out of there so you could lower it again and do it all. But yeah, it was a lot of work. And then Trinity, we were in the library. The old Trinity gym.
Yep.
We would broadcast from the library. So there it wasn't so bad. You just would go up into the library. You didn't have to fight through the crowds and do that type of thing. So, but yeah.
Yeah, well, because that was when the arena, they didn't have bleachers on all four sides. It was just
two sides, just on the
east
sides.
and west, right? Yeah.
I can't even remember.
Yeah, I think it'd have to be east and west, and because they always had it covered. Nobody ever knew what it was, and then I want to say it had to have been Ken Keller told us that's where they used to broadcast the games.
Yeah, that's where we broadcast from. And then after a few years, they put a phone line in there because they needed a line in the library, so they put a phone jack in there. So then we always had a jack there. I loved going to Trinity because you didn't have to take the Marty so all you had to take is a plug in for your phone cord, plug it into your play-by-play unit, and you could go. But Dickinson High, for many years, they didn't run a phone line in there. And then we had the Marty unit. And we used to have to take the Marty unit at Whitney Stadium, too, and climb up. I don't know if you remember the old press box.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, we'd have to climb up in there, and that was always interesting, too, with the Marty unit. But we got her done. We did it, and it worked, and it was fine. And, in fact, for a lot of years, Bob Weiler said, we're not spending any money on phone lines. We got that Marty unit. And I used to fight and argue with them, and then we finally convinced them that maybe we should retire the Marty unit and go to phone lines, and we finally did. And then, of course, now, like it's kind of funny. You're sitting here with this computer, and I go do go to the State B tournament or something right now, and there's like 12 radio stations there doing the game, and there's probably two of us, Mark Beagley and Devil's Lake, and myself, that don't have a computer in front of us. Everybody else has got computers. I mean, they're running their stuff through computers, off computers. they're keeping the score on computers, and and that's great that they can do that. But I'm an old paper guy,
Yep.
so that's how I still like to do it. And Mark does the same thing, and he's a great broadcaster too out of Devil's Lake. So, but yeah, it's amazing how tech, and I'm sure it'll change a lot more in the next 10 years too. But I don't think in 10 years from now I'll be doing it anymore. So.
Yeah, and I've tried to read up on it. So like it's actually brought a webcam I bought from Walmart, but you see a lot of where I mean this is about as much as I can afford. In a perfect world, you want to get like one of those really nice 4K cameras, but if anybody wants to advertise and fund those for me, please let me know. Yeah. But you've we're on the topic of press boxes. You've probably been in some pretty interesting ones. Is there any that really stick out in your mind that you were? I know the DHS one, climbing up a ladder. Do you have any other similar where you're really crammed or whether it was really hot?
Well, when we travel around now, even now there's some press boxes where you go and you got to climb up and through. I go to Waldorf, Iowa, where it's Forest City, Iowa, and it's a nice place to broadcast from, but it's an older area. But you got to climb up a ladder, like a ladder that's kind of slanted, but you got to go way up into the library, above their library, and you got to climb up that with your gear. Now with the Marty unit, I don't think I could do it, but with the gear you have now, you can do it. But yeah, it's crazy to do that for basketball and football. Most places are pretty, most high school fields are really good now, and most college fields are very good. But in the old days, I mean, Mayville State was absolutely terrible. University of Jamestown, they have where they play now, they still play, but they redid it, but they just had an old dilapidated press box, and there were holes in the floor, there were holes in the wall, there was holes in the ceiling. So if it rained or snowed, there would be stuff coming in, it was open. Yeah, there's for that. But gyms are usually, you're either in the bleachers or they have an area for you. So gyms have been pretty good. Scott Gym was always kind of interesting because in the old days they had that box up in Scott Gym.
Yep.
We used to go up. That was KDIX built that, put that up there. So we used that for many, many years. And that had a ladder that you always had to climb up into too. So that was always a challenge a little bit. But once you got up there, it was great. You had a great view.
The box you're talking about, is it the ones over in the corners there?
No. This was above, right on the wall. It was up above the wall, where the corners are. We used to be there too.
Yep.
But before that, there was a great big box, probably bigger than the one at Dickinson High. And it was enclosed. It had glass in it, had mirrors in it so you could see the scoreboard. And that was there for many, many years. And that's where we broadcast from. And then it got too dangerous and they didn't want a lawsuit. So they finally tore it out. And then we went to the corners, and now we're down on Press Road. So,
what year did they do that?
I don't remember. No. I was going to say I was there. Oh man, I was going to 79, 80. We still broadcast from there. Probably in the mid 80s, or mid 80s or late 80s, they probably took that out. But until then, yeah, okay. That's where, because Bob Weiler and Stan had built that specifically for KDIX to use. Because at that time, all the district tournaments and regional tournaments were at Scott Gym. So they built a press box because it was just too loud. And then it was we insulated it. It was really a nice place. It was just tougher than heck to get up there.
Oh, gotcha. What was the Mayville State football press box like?
It was old, dilapidated, and cold, for football. And basketball, they've always in basketball had us right at the scorers table. They have enough room at their scorers table, so we've always been. But and now they redid the press box. It's still not real great, but it's closed in very good. You got windows in front of you, you can slide them open and shut and that type of thing. So it's good. Every place you go now for football, the nicest places, I've been from Minneapolis to Seattle, and the nicest football facility to broadcast from is the back, without a doubt. The press box, the media press box, we have the radio people. There isn't a nicer one any place in the upper Midwest. And I've been from Wisconsin to Minneapolis to Montana. It's guys come in from out of state, Dickinson State. Once in a while, you get somebody come in, they just can't believe that we have two radio press boxes like we have there. I mean, it's unreal. They're as nice as the one where, Target Field where the Twins play, or where the Vikings play, where the radio people actually sit. The one here is just as nice, or if not nicer than that, and it's bigger too.
Yeah, I would agree. And you brought up like most of the places you go for high school games too. I think it's more of an issue for coaches that go up to the press boxes because there's a few, and even like this year that I remember where we were right next to each other in us coaches were like right next to each other in the press box together. I remember Southern McLean was that way. Hazen is that way as well. I'm trying to think. Shiloh in a roundabout way is because you can still hear everything that the coaches are saying, even though we're on opposite sides. Yeah. But and same thing with Bowman is your doors are right next to them. But
Valley City State, where they play, I don't know if you're familiar where they play football.
I've driven by it.
Yeah, but they had a press box, and it's not any better. There's just not a lot of room up there. But when I started until probably 10 years ago, I would sit with the coaches. I would sit I'd be in the middle. The offensive coordinator would be to my left, and the defensive coordinator to my right. And I'd always tell them, you guys can say whatever you want, just don't swear. And that was just for Dickinson State games. But I had Buddy Etzel and Arlen Hofflin, one to my left and one to my right, and trying to get Arlen not to swear sometimes when they weren't doing stuff to do. But he did, and he did a good job. And they finally figured out. I kept telling him, I said, you don't want to, so now they squeeze you into a little about 2x2 spot in the main area where you're with the PA guy and the scorekeeper and the stats people. So it's a little bit, but for many, many years you were, that's where I was in Valley City, the offensive coordinator to my left and the defensive coordinator to the right. And I was right in the middle of them. They had their headsets on. I'd call the game, and we knew what the play was coming and we knew what defense we were playing because we picked it up. I mean, it was that's how close they were.
Did you ever have to like separate them where they were going to come to blows?
Oh,
no, nothing like that.
It never got that bad. But I did have to go like this a few times and say, don't swear. And because, well, you do it. So, the emotions you get caught up in and stuff. So it was always kind of interesting going to Valley City State for football.
Well, and it's a little bit easier now because our offensive coordinator, Jacob Oderman, he's on the field. So I don't have to hold him back and calm him down as much anymore. But
I can't believe you have to do that.
I know. He's always so calm everywhere else. It's just football must get him. That's what gets the juices going. Yeah. But when you said that it was, I don't know Bud Etzel at all, but I know we had a family friends that had a suite up in that was right next to where DSU's coaches were, and listening to Hoffland. Yeah. And it's like, I bet that had to be tough to make sure he didn't swear, make sure they didn't pick up on that.
He was great. I mean, and when we travel, Arlen and I were always roommates, so I'd always compliment. I said, I don't know how you do it, why you did it, but I've always said it was amazing. He was always really good about it. And, then he said, well, I won't be next week back in Dickinson, but I will be here this week. So, but he did a great job, and it was good. And I mean, it was fun to do it, but you were just always a little tentative about maybe, and if they say something, there's nothing you can do. I mean, it happens and you just keep going. So, but it was always amazing at Valley City. You were right between the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator.
That is, I wonder how many other places have it like that.
I don't think there's probably any place like Valley City. And in fact, some of the guys that did it, I know for the conference schools, some of them would ask for a table and they would sit outside. But I had all my gear, and it was always windy and cold and wet in Valley City, it seemed like, when we played, and I didn't want to deal with that. So they said, well, we'll just put you up there. That's where you got to go. And they always would run a phone line in for me, so we just did it that way.
Do you have a preference for when you're calling? I guess this is more for basketball. Do you like being more on press row, or do you like being more up on top? Is there a preference, either one that you like either way?
It doesn't make a lot of difference. I kind of like to be up a little bit, like at Trinity, where you're up a little bit as long as the fan stays seated. But when you're on the floor, like sometimes at Scott Gym or some other places when you travel, like most of the conference schools, about 3 or 4 of them, you're right on the floor. Sometimes the coaches are in your way. Sometimes the players get in your way. Sometimes the referees get in your way. So from the floors, I've gotten to like that quite a bit. But if I had a preference, I'd prefer to be like at Dickinson High, without climbing up the ladder, a little bit above like that. I like to do it a little bit like at the event center, or I still call it the Civic Center in Bismarck. Like for the WA state tournaments, they have the the floor with the teams, and then they have us elevated up a
Oh,
little
yep.
bit, and then you're up high enough where you're over the coaches, you're over the players. You can look. You're still right on the floor almost, but you're looking out. You're looking up and over them, and they're even if they stand up, and the referees don't usually get in your way. So I enjoy the broadcast game. That's one of my favorite places to. And they do the same thing. And when we go over to the exhibition hall, they have us up a little bit so the players not by a lot, but by enough where you can see it. So then I enjoy being on the floor. But if I had my dithers for basketball, I'd like to be about 4 rows up in the bleachers. And like at Trinity, it's great too, except when you have regional tournaments and that type of thing, when it's packed in there and you got fans in front of you and they're emotional and they're standing up and cheering. Well, once they stand, and then you got the table, so you can't even get up. So if Lynn Gress takes a shot with 2 seconds left, well, did it go in or did it not? So sometimes and I've had that happen a couple of times at Trinity where I just wasn't quite sure what happened at the end of the game because you couldn't see it. And you ask them to stay seated and they're pretty good about it till it gets down to the nitty gritty, and then they get excited, and that's fine. That's part of the game. So, but yeah, so I'd rather answer that question. I guess I'd like to be about on the floor, about 2 rows up instead of way up above. But anyway, any place is pretty good. Basketball, you're usually pretty close no matter where you're at. Football, you can get quite a ways away sometimes.
Yeah. Does that make it feel like at the event Civic Center where you're in your press row spot, but you're also part of it where you're part of the crowd. You kind of, because the crowd's right there. It's just a little walking aisle that separates it. Does that help?
Oh, I think anytime anytime you do a play-by-play and you're in an area where you can be involved with the motion of the fans in the game, it really helps out. I mean, I just like that's the only thing, like at the back where you're there, in the football sometimes you're isolated a little bit. You're up above, and in most places you're away from the fans. The fans aren't. I think the one place I like to go, I hadn't gone for a few years, and we went. I can't remember if it was this year or last year. We went to DeLax Burlington.
Yep, that was this year.
Yeah, that was this year, and it was kind of nice because the bleachers come right up to but you're still above them, but you can put a crowd mic out, and then you can really get the feel for it. Where sometimes at the back, we have a crowd mic and you have the window up there, but you're still so far up above everybody, and you get it with your crowd, but it isn't like being at DeLax Burlington where you're right there. And most football places are like that. You're a little bit away, and you're always closed in. I mean, in football, you got a window, in front of you and that type of thing. Then you can open them up sometimes, but I'd rather have I don't want to be right in the middle of the crowd, but I'd like them to be around because and I think your listeners feel that too. And sometimes it gets too loud and they can't hear it. You got to really be careful with that also.
Yeah. Well, and from where you were against DeLax this year, their home crowd didn't have a whole lot to cheer about.
No. But it's still crowd noise, and you pick, you kind of pick it up, and even if it's a little depressing, you still pick that aspect of it up too. The quietness and that type of thing also. So it's fun. That's to me, that's what high school sports is about anyway, is the emotion and the enthusiasm and that type of thing. And it's in all sports, but high school sports, it just seems to be a little more active. And that's why I always liked high school sports. I always enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. You mentioned going on bus rides. Do you have any, and you've spent a lot, especially now, and then a few years ago when DSU was in the Frontier Conference going through Montana, Oregon. Do you have any, of all your years of 49 years of broadcasting, do you have any memorable experiences on the bus?
I remember we went to La Grande, Oregon, and that we were still in the Frontier, and that's about, I don't know, 26, 27-hour trip. So on the way out, we split it up. We stayed in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, went to La Grande and played Eastern Oregon, and got beat really bad. It was, it was like that's the only game I've done where about 60 seconds into the game, I knew what the final score was going to be, and I knew it wasn't going to be in favor of Dickinson State. They scored like 14 points in 60 seconds. They ran a kickoff back. We got the ball through an interception. They returned that for a touchdown. I looked up the clock, and there was 14 minutes and 2 seconds left. It was already 14-0. Well, about 2 minutes later, it was 28-0. and it ended up being, I don't know, they got beat like, I think maybe it was, to this day, might be the worst loss. I think it was like 59-3 or 59-6. So, you just get beat. The weather was crappy. So we get on the bus, and the two charters, and you got 26 hours ahead of it, and we're going all the way back. They'll switch bus drivers someplace in Montana. So we head back. We get just opposite, just on the outside, the west side of Coeur d'Alene, heading towards Idaho, heading towards Montana, and the bus we're on breaks down.
Oh.
So the one charter breaks down, and they can't fix it. So the other bus pulls up behind us. So, and they traveled, I think, with 54 players, and then there was, like, with the coaches and the press and the trainers, there's probably 54 players, 64, probably around 70 people. Each bus, had about 35 people, which on charters, which are 54, 55, is great. There's plenty of room, but they all piled onto one bus.
Oh,
all onto one bus.
That's a tight fit.
And we had people sitting on laps. We had people laying on top of each other in the aisles. And we drove from Coeur d'Alene, Iowa, all the way to Billings, Montana. And that's, I can't even remember how far it was. But you're coming off a 59-6 loss. You're not happy. The weather is crappy. Everybody's miserable. And the bus breaks down. So then you got 70 people on one bus, and you're traveling. It was probably another 10 hours to Billings, 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
And then the bus company from Rapid City sent another bus up to Billings. So then we were able to get back onto two buses. But that's the worst trip I've ever been on. I mean, I've been on some bad weather trips, but that one was simply the worst. I mean, it was, you got beat bad. It was no fun. And then the bus broke down, and then it was just, then you were piling on top. You had three people on top of me. Like, I was in the very front seat, and I can't remember who was sitting next to me, but him and I were sitting, and we had two guys. Each of us had a guy on a lap. One of the football players. At least it wasn't like the big offensive lineman, but it was still. And that's the way the whole bus was, because they had to get them back, and they couldn't find another bus, so they said, we're all getting on one bus, and we're going, and we did. That's the worst trip I've ever been on.
That sounds like one of the worst trips you could.
It was, and I've been on some wet trips where the weather's been bad, the roads are bad, especially with the college, in the winter, because you travel, so far. You go to La Crosse, Wisconsin, Omaha, Nebraska, Forest City, Iowa. So the people I admire most after 49 years in Dickinson and 51 years in radio, besides coaches and dealing with kids and dealing with fans and dealing with parents, and are bus drivers. I mean, they don't pay bus drivers enough, because those guys do an amazing job. I mean, you think about it, they've got 40 to 50 people or 30 to 40 people, and their lives are in their hands.
Yep.
And I mean, it can be a blizzard and you can't see 2 feet in front of you, and the roads are icy and terrible. And I mean, it's unbelievable what bus drivers do. And I said, I just respect the heck out of them. And I know they don't get paid enough, and I don't think they're going to get paid anymore, but they should get paid way more than a lot of people do for what they do, moving kids around in the winter, especially in the winter. Maybe in the summer and fall it isn't so bad, but when you drive in the winter, whether you go, I don't know if you went to Beulah this year for any of the regions.
I didn't know.
I mean, the roads are, I've been on a lot of bad roads, and I'm sure that, my memory isn't real great, but I don't remember many years where the travel for that tournament was worse than it was this year. And I mean, it was, and Bowman was driving up, and these bus drivers are getting those kids there and getting them home and battling the weather and the roads. And I mean, it was just, I just admire them a lot.
Well, it's funny you bring that up too, because I have a buddy from Bowman, and he was talking, because the big thing around here is the the regional always hosted at Trinity, right, and all this. And he's like, I'm not making excuses for this, but having to drive 3 hours in crappy roads and driving all the way up to Hazen, and you're dealing with 15 to 18-year-old kids, yeah, who's their mind's not mature. I mean, you were that age. I mean, it was and the mental psyche where Beulah only has to go about 7 or 8 miles, and the whole time, and I was kind of waiting for him to finish, and I'm going like, so just time out here. You, for the longest time, have bugged me about how it's not fair that the regional is always at Trinity. So are you actually saying that the regional should be at Trinity every year?
No, it's true. And I've visited with people from Bowman, and they said, we don't want to do this anymore. It's fine to drive to Dickinson, and then then they're driving I don't know what it is to Bowman, 75, 80 miles, and
Yeah.
Beulah and Hazen's about 80 miles, 85. And I said Beulah, I meant Hazen, but we went through Beulah all the time. And yeah, so I said it's tough, but those bus drivers just when I get on off a charter, when I go with Trinity like you guys, I always think first person I think is the bus driver, because I mean they're getting us there and getting us back, and they got a lot of responsibility on their hand, good roads or bad roads, and they do a great job.
Yeah, myself as well, and especially where, like you said, when you were going out to Oregon, driving through Coeur d'Alene, you're driving in the mountains. There's curves, you're going in and out and up and down hills, and especially if the weather is bad, like you said, you could be dealing with ice, snow, slush, any of that type of stuff that is just not fun.
Yeah, one thing I do admit, though, if it's really bad, the bus drivers will say, hey, the coaches, and the kids always want to get home, especially in the college, and go, we're not driving anymore. We'll find a motel. We're staying there. We'll get up in the morning and try it again. And they do make some good choices. So, yeah. But I just always been, I just don't think people sometimes realize how important bus drivers, I mean, everything's important, but they really are important.
Yeah.
They really, really are.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially this year too, because these are some of the worst roads that I've ever driven on in my life. I don't know about you, but I know of my 28 years, like I don't ever remember roads being this bad, where it was like you're going on the interstate and you can feel it just pull.
Yeah, it was a bad year for travel this year, but it's over with. So we'll see what next year.
We got through it. Yep. And you've got now it's baseball season here. You've got do you guys have, where are you, do you have any plans to travel with the baseball team?
Yeah, we'll do what we do with high school baseball. We do the home games, and we do all the tournament games. And in Legion, we try to do all the home games, which we do, and then we try to do all the in-state divisional games. So we'll travel to like Grand Forks, Jamestown, Fargo, Minot, Williston, Mandan, Bismarck. We'll do those road games. So we end up doing quite a few baseball games, but on the Legion side. So yeah, so it's an opportunity to get to see that. Baseball is kind of fun to do. It's a little more low key. The only thing I don't like sometimes, the older I get about baseball, is it doesn't have a time clock. So like last night. Or not last night, but that would have been let's see, it would have been Thursday night. We were at the ballpark and they were playing Fargo Post 400, who's a really good baseball team. And when we do the home games, Jim Dahl does the first game and I do the second game. And we just flip flop from the studio to the ballpark. And the first game was about 2 hours, which is to me a 7-inning high school game or Legion game. If it's a good game, it should be about an hour and a half, hour and 45. That game was pretty long, about 2 hours. Well, then we had a little bit of rain in the second game, and it was a 12-11 ball game, and there were like 14 walks, 5 hit batters, 6 errors, 22 hits, 24. It ended up 12-11. We started at 7:35, and we were done at 10:45 with a 20-minute rain. So it was like 3 hours and 20 minutes before it's done. So that's the only thing. Baseball sometimes, just can be really long, and it can be, especially high school or Legion sometimes, because it's, if you don't, most of the teams have a couple of good pitchers, but then when you go to your secondary pitchers, sometimes they're not quite as good and don't throw as many strikes. So it gets long. That's my only thing about high school Legion, is sometimes the length of the games. College games are pretty good, and that type of thing. But yeah, I still enjoy doing them. And then when you're at home, it's not so bad. From the Southside Ballpark to the station is about 5 blocks, 6 blocks into my house is another. So it isn't like you're in Grand Forks coming back at midnight and you come back when the sun's coming up in the morning.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I don't miss those. Probably don't miss too many of those bus rides.
But it's fun to do baseball, and that's a more relaxing sport for me. That's kind of why I like to do it. It's more of a slow pace, and you can talk a little bit more, and it's just not as quite a competitive intenseness. You got 7 innings or 14 innings if you're doing a doubleheader, and you might have 2 or 3 innings that are real good, but then the other innings you can talk about how nice the trees look out in center field and that type of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, and and it also helps that Dickinson has the best baseball program in the state. Yeah. They have the most state championships in the state of North Dakota. And baseball's been sanctioned since the 2000 season, I believe.
Yeah.
and you've gotten to call, what is it, five high school, two Legion state championships. What are some memories that you have of the baseball program?
Well, I just remember the baseball programs, high school or Legion, are just. I mean, they have the coaches that are really dedicated to them, and like Pete Dobitz at Dickinson High, and Tyler Frenzel does a great job at Dickinson High, and or for the Dickinson Rough Riders, and they combine. And the thing I really like about a high school and even the Legion baseball is sometimes you sit back and you wonder, man, oh man, if they did this in football and they did this in basketball, how good would Dickinson be?
Yeah.
Because, you look at the high school team this year, I think they had 4 or 5 starters from Trinity, 4 or 5 kids that started from Dickinson High. Legion is kind of that way. And they combine and play together. And I mean, and they're good and they're coached well. And it's fun to watch, the intermingling between the kids, because you got Trinity kids playing with Dickinson High kids and that type of thing. And when you combine them, if maybe we should co-op all of them in all sports, and then just be double A in every sport. But you're not going to do that. But it's kind of nice to see that in baseball, because they just need to do that so everybody gets a chance to play. But yeah, it's fun to watch them, and coaching has always been impressive with me. And baseball is such a hard sport in North Dakota, because in the spring you're just never sure how many games you're going to play. Some years you might get to play 35, 36. This year, I think they only got to play 23 or 24, because of the weather and the cold and the haze and the smoke and that type of thing we had. So they lost some games and that type of thing. But it's fun to do. But they just got good quality kids, good players. I mean, you think of Tyler Frenzel, how good he was, his brother Cole. You remember when Ben Haroff played, and those guys played, and Brad Jaeger. And I mean, they just have had some really, really good baseball players. And they've gone on to do some really good things. They have, and just good deep baseball teams, especially high school has just been really well. Anytime you have 5 state championships, and you're doing the right thing. And Legion is even tougher, because Legion, you get into that scenario. We were just talking about that last night, where Bismarck combines 5 schools for one team. Minot takes 2 or 3 for one team. And Fargo, they have 6 or 7 schools they combine into 2 or 3 teams. Grand Forks has a couple of schools that they combine into one. So Dickinson and Mandan and Williston are kind of the outliers. What they have in high school is basically what they have in Legion. So, and all those. I was just reading a story today in the Bismarck Tribune. I know Mike Skitlin really is a good friend of mine, the head coach of Bismarck High, and they were going through, and they had 2 All-Staters from Century playing, 2 All-Staters from Legacy, 2 All-Staters from Shiloh, 2 All-Staters from Bismarck High. So they had like 8 or 9 All-Staters on one team, so, and they're playing Dickinson now, and Dickinson's basically got the same team they had in high school, and they're playing a superstar all-star team in the Bismarck Governors all year long. So it becomes a little more difficult in Legion than it does in high school.
And it's even gotten tougher too, because you have schools like West Fargo who have 3 high schools now as well, and they've always been a powerhouse in baseball. I believe they have that Andy Young who played for the Diamondbacks for a while.
And they've got, they combine West Fargo Cheyenne and West Fargo Horace now, and just West Fargo for
probably another one coming too.
Yeah, and for one Legion team. Yeah. So so it's a real battle for Legion. So when like a team like Dickinson or Mandan or Williston, if they win a state championship, they earn it, and they're good, because they're beating the best of the best from all those teams that are put together. And basically, I like to call them all-star teams. They're not. They're the Minot Vistas and the Bismarck Governors, but I mean, that Bismarck, when I read that article today, I got thinking about that, and I'm going, holy cow. And then he went on to talk about 2 or 3 other kids that are all WDA that are playing on the team, and not playing a lot, but on the team. So, I mean, it's crazy. So baseball in the summer, if Dickinson's going to be good, and they are good, they're going to have to be really good to be competitive with those teams.
Yeah, and I believe they host the state tournament this year.
I think is in fact, we were talking about that Thursday night. They used to always have playing games. They've dropped that. Now there's 10 teams, so they'll just have a 10-team state Legion tournament. It'll run on Monday through Saturday, I think the 24th through the 29th of July, and it's Dickinson's year to host it, so that'll be a fun tournament. There'll be some really, really good baseball, because there's a lot of those kids go Division I and baseball, and of course a lot of them go. One of the things I know that kids in North Dakota like to do, Iowa has such a strong junior college. A lot of those kids go for 2 years down to Iowa and play, and they do that, and that's more of a pump up for them than almost going to like an NDSU or University of Minnesota and playing, because those programs in Iowa really turn out a lot of Division I players, and I know North Dakota has quite a few kids down there playing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember the last time they hosted it here, I was interning for Park and Rec, and I spent that entire week at the ballpark, and it was tremendous baseball. I remember when Dalton Feeney pitched. It would have been one of whatever day it was, and there were about 5 or 6 scouts from major college programs with guns. And unfortunately for him, he got hurt his elbow, so he only lasted like 10 pitches before he had to go out of the game. But he still ended up having a really good career for NC State, and I don't know if he's still playing in the minor leagues somewhere.
I don't think he is, but his brother's
a stud for the Bison.
Yep. He does a really good job too. And I said, the other thing you forget about too, and kudos to of course James is retired now, James Kramer, but they worked hard at getting Central Plains regional tournaments, got a Babe Ruth World Series, and brought some really, really exciting and good baseball in the Dickinson and the community. Really, really supported it. I mean, you get to that Central Plains level, and you're looking at some Major League Baseball players, because I remember you mentioned college scouts. I remember doing Central Plains for, we've had, I think, 4 of them here. And I remember there's not just college scouts there's pro scouts at those too, watching those kids play too when they get to that Central Plains level right before the the American Legion World Series. Yeah.
Yeah, and then before you're going to blink twice, and it's going to be August. Football season is going to be starting. There's definitely some excitement. DSU, I think, is going to be really solid again. Trinity,
good.
We're excited. I don't know a whole lot about DHS, but
Dickinson, I think they'll be very competitive again. They got going last year a little bit, and they got quite a few kids back, so it'll be interesting to see how the football season pans out. But that I always love the fall, because the fall is kind of my season where I only have one sport that we really focus in. With 3 football teams, so you're always busy. And I like it too, because it's always Friday and Saturday, basically. So, you get an opportunity to see them play and follow them around. Yeah, it's always fun to do. And my favorite play-by-play sport is football. My favorite sport is basketball, and the sport I like to do is baseball. So I like all 3 of them. So it's I kind of got to fall back in each of them. But I do really, really love play-by-play football. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we were talking a little bit about DHS. Now, they have one state championship, and that was in 1997. Is there anything that you remember about that team?
Well, I remember they had Jason Moore, and he was pretty good. I believe Jason played and was a running. I think that was the year they won the state championship. If I reflect back, Dean Goodall was the head coach.
Yep.
Yeah, and they just had they just did a lot of crazy things with the football, and Dean was kind of a riverboat gambler and did a lot of things, and they just had. Were always so well prepared and got things done, and just had some. I think trying to remember if Jason Denius was a quarterback with that group or not, but they just had some really, really talented athletes, and of course they had the Carlson boys. Then they had some good teams. Didn't quite get to the didn't win the state championship, but were in the battle to be there, and just a really talented team. Had some good wide receivers, and they just ran the football and threw the football around, and I remember them doing that well, and I remember when Coach Randy Gordon, who
future or Hall of Famer coming up too.
Yeah, and I played against Randy when he was in New England, and then we got.
What was he like as a player?
He was slow, and he would hold on, and in basketball he would step on my toes, so I couldn't shoot. But he was a good basketball player, a good football. He was a really, really good athlete. But us guys from Mott, we always give those guys from New England a little bit of a bad time. But Randy was a good athlete, a really good basketball. He was good at everything he did. So he was, and he was really, really good at coaching.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just outstanding. He just got a lot out of the kids, and he was always prepared, and he just knew the game of football inside and out. I said, I've been blessed with just great coaches. I mean, it's like, you look at Randy, and, you look at like Roger Stone, and you look at Kenny Keller, you look at Greg Grinsteiner, you look at Jack Carlson, and you look at just some of the coaches. Yeah, Hank. Well, yeah, Hank is almost in a category by himself. But in the high school levels, you just think about some of the coaches that have gone through Dickinson High and Dickinson Trinity, and it's been outstanding, and they just been great motivators of kids and that type. And the coaches now are They just do a great job. It's hard to coach now. I mean, you
Yep.
coach a little bit, so you know what it's like to coach. I mean, kids are different now than they were 50 years ago, even 25, and probably even 5 years ago. It's just a little bit of a different scenario. But if you can get them to compete and work hard and believe in what you're doing, you'll get the job done. And the guys I mentioned all have the ability to do that. The kids maybe didn't want to, but for some reason they did, and had a lot of success with those coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've gotten to call a handful of state championships. As you got to be approaching about 15 or so right now.
Well, I guess I was going to write some things down. Yeah, I'm thinking, basketball. I remember calling 2 Dickinson High championships, and that was kind of fun too.
What do you remember about those teams?
Well, I remember the Dickinson High team was very talented. When they had Ott and the Brown and the Mormon and Popple and those guys, and my son played on that team. So they that first state championship, that was the first one in the history for Dickinson High in basketball. And that was fun to cover because you had a little bit of a tie to it with your son on the team. And then the following 3 or 4 years later, they won another one with Dean Winchevsky, and that was a good group. And I remember doing a lot of Trinity, championship games. And I said the only game we were just talking about that we just wrapped up our North Dakota Sportscasters and Sports Writers Convention. In the first, we meet on the first Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday in June, and we were talking about. Somebody asked me, Rod, what's your most memorable? And with Trinity, and I said, I just remember Landon Smith hitting a basket against Mayville, Portland, and I had Lee Leafs. I was doing the play-by-play, and Lee Leafs was sitting beside me, and he had to make just about an impossible shot, and he made it, and they won by 1 point. They won the state championship,